Hi everyone, my name is Kim Ang,
And I'm Cinda Kay.
and welcome to our podcast, Superpower and Sidekick.
Where we team with spirit to live a life beyond our imagination.
Yes, indeed.
And the thing is nothing, there is nothing we can do to put somebody else on a spiritual path. I met Mike because that's what he was into. And I thought, oh, perfect match. And then he fell off. He was more gung ho than me at the beginning, but then he fell off. And he's still not back where he was when I met him. With that drive for that spiritual knowledge and connection.
That's a good topic we should talk about.
Blame
Like,
shifting?
no, like how you get together with someone thinking that you have this amazing spiritual connection, and then somebody falls off the path.
Or you both get together and you might be not spiritually inclined, and then one ends up spiritually inclined and the other one's not interested. I see that a lot too. And I see more breakups at the beginning of an awakening, someone's awakening, because all of a sudden we get back our self-value and we're not with the right person. Is many times what happens. And we realize that we've aligned with people that don't have our best interest at heart. And then when you wake up and wait a minute, I do have this beautiful light, and so does everybody else, and I want someone I can shine it with and that I can enjoy it with. And it's I think that's one of the deepest, hardest things to figure out, is how to get on the same page spiritually. That is where I think religion and a structured spirituality sometimes is, at least it's an easier path. I'm not saying it's necessarily the better path, but it is easier.
You mean in terms of the two people having the same religion?
Yeah, because they're in the basically the same structure, so there's less chance for interpretation and arguments. For instance, the way we kind of do it, freewheeling with spirituality, there can be a lot of discontent and disagreement on how things work and how things run. My ex-husband was very into the alien phenomenon, and I was not at all, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I do kind of get it, I just have a different perspective of it now. I get into star beings and multidimensional realities. Once I reframed it, then like, no, yeah, I'll agree with that.
Hmm. So, do you think that is it because one person has grown and evolved and the other hasn't, and then they kind of drift apart because they're no longer on the same wavelength, or because um, I just lost my question.
Well, along the lines of what you're saying, and I can use an example of mine and Mike's life, I had gone through lots and lots and lots of trauma long before I met him. And he was kind of an elite, spoiled boy and had not gone through anything. And we had a big disconnect from that. But he went through some trauma this last year. And all of a sudden, things that he could not see prior to that car accident, he can now see. He adjusted my back without telling me he was going to do it at one point, and actually broke my back. He had zero concept at that time and zero compassion or empathy for what he had done, because he had never suffered in that way. And so he literally could not conceptualize it. But after having a back injury of his own, yesterday he was hugging me and he goes, "Oh my gosh, your back's swollen right there. I can tell you re-injured it." And all of a sudden
Hmm.
he's aware. So sometimes I think it's also just life experience, and that because perspective is so different. And for myself, someone who had come from trauma with someone who had not had any trauma, I could talk till I was blue in the face and he wasn't going to understand what I was talking about until he experienced some of his own trauma, and then it started making sense.
But how can someone who hasn't gone through that trauma be able to help relate to someone who has gone through the trauma to help them?
That's literally try and work at putting that person's shoes on your own feet and conceptualize and witness what would it feel like if I had been through what they've been through. What would it feel like emotionally and internally to myself? And I don't, being an empath personally, it's weird to me that other people don't try to understand what somebody else is going through, because I can feel things like it's happening first person. And it took me a lot to realize that somebody else's suffering is outside of someone else to most people. And that it's very hard to understand what another person's going through. You literally have to like physically, not physically, but seriously walk into their shoes and start creating an environment of what did they go through in your mind to have at least some idea of what the emotional, the horror. I mean, trauma, let's face it, it's a horror show. It's a nightmare in most times. And people, trauma victims, go through something that somebody else might have zero understanding of. Because my father, I love that man because he'd never looked at anybody as being a villain or a bad guy. And I take after him. I have a little bit too much trust, and I lost my train of thought. See, now I'm doing you, but but just that, he wouldn't think that somebody else could hurt somebody that bad, because his brain literally couldn't wrap around it. Someone could be that malicious or that evil or that hateful. My mother was just completely hate filled, and he had no idea what that even was.
So, did they ever stay married,
Oh
or
no.
did they get a divorce?
Well, they were married for 15 years and divorced for 35 before he passed. And she still hates him very deeply. And he's dead.
There's that resentment, right?
Well, and that's holding that poison, hoping that you're going to hurt the other person, but you're only poisoning yourself. I tried to share that concept with my mom, and she could not even wrap her head around what I was trying to say. That, hey, dad went on and just lived a good life. He didn't think about you again.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. While you're stewing over here, the other person is going on with their life, so they don't even know that you're holding a grudge against them.
At all.
Meanwhile, you're holding on to all this resentment, and it just like it's heavy. It's a heavy, heavy emotion to
It's a
carry
heavy
that.
emotion. That was something I had a hard time understanding, where Mike was coming from with his hate and resentment, because it's just not how my brain works. I still have a hard time understanding that, because it just doesn't make any sense from and I try to wrap my head around it. And especially someone who hasn't hardly been through anything. I mean, I'm not, he has been through some stuff now, especially, and he'd gone through some stuff. I mean, we all have childhood stuff and we all have teenager stuff, most definitely. But at the same time, the level of it was minor compared to what had happened in my life. So I didn't, I had really worked hard to make sure that I didn't have resentment and hate and those kinds of things holding me down, because some of the things that happened to me, it's real easy to hate somebody. But for my own protection, I worked, because I had my mom's example, and I didn't want to hold on to the hate. I saw what it does to a person. And it's still hard for me to understand some of Mike's resentment. And I think some of it, though, for instance, I actually think that he has a spiritual mission to help overcome some of the today's money viewpoints, perspectives, because he carries such angst about it. But that tells me, okay, well, you're here to help change that. But resentment's not going to change it. Change of perspective is going to change it. And I think that's it. So many people think, oh, well, if I resent this long enough, it's going to change it. Resentment, the only thing it does is bring you into a lower frequency and makes your life hell. Literally, it's the only thing it does. You might as well put a prisoner bracelet and lock yourself down. Resentment is probably the most emotion that gets us stuck, I think.
Yeah, because you're so stuck in the past about what happened to you, and you're still resenting what happened to you or whoever did whatever to you, right? You can't move forward.
Well, like myself, I'll have flashbacks sometime, and in that flashback, I might feel the hatred or the resentment. But once I start to process it, the first thing I do is working on that. And it's not like I discount myself for being angry or anything like that, but that's going to be the one that I want to process the most, because I know that's the one that's going to do myself the most damage. But most people don't realize that, and it takes a while to get to that point. It's like finally it tips over and it goes the other direction. But it takes diligence and like staying on top of it, to not, especially with somebody else really does not, it abuses you to the point that it causes trauma in your life. It's really difficult to not resent and hate that person.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it helps at all for healing to feed it. Now, but I allow myself to be angry about what happened. I don't think I should have to. I think being fake and thinking, oh, everything's hunky dory and is a lot worse than being. I'm better if I'm honest, and I don't get stuck in the trauma if I'm honest. I think some people get struck in their trauma because they don't know how to be honest with themselves yet.
Hmm. So how do you become honest with yourself and dealing with your trauma?
You kind of have to dive into it, and it's not always pleasant. But there's a shadow working in that unconscious all the time. So I
Mhm.
work on bringing to bring light to my shadow, so that way I'm not creating my nightmares. But it takes consciousness. It takes, I have to have intention and work at it. It's not something that just comes automatic.
So is the first step connecting with spirit?
With spirit and your own emotion. I think I think one of the reason why we may get stuck in old traumas is disassociation and suppression. So there has to be a door where we allow that pain to enter so it can be processed. Unprocessed pain becomes our unconscious itty bitty shitty committee. So the more that we can process whatever emotion we might be going to, and quit judging it, oh, this is a good emotion or a bad emotion, become witnesses to our emotion and go, oh, I'm angry right now. And allow yourself that anger and see why you're angry and see if all your boundaries are where they need to be able to create a safe space for your own healing. And I say safe, but safe is a very relative term, and a lot of times there's no such thing as a safe space. So maybe a brave space would be a better way to do it. A friend of mine uses that, and I really like that usage, because it takes some heart to face that pain. And if someone loves somebody that's been through trauma, the more that they can sit with them and be witness, not carry it, not take it on as theirs, but see that person and really see that person as much as possible. I mean, I don't think that we can, in physical bodies, can even have 100%, but we can definitely make an effort to be with that person and sit with that person and witness their pain, because then it's easier for them to process it and move on from it. But the more we avoid it and run from it, it's like a snowball. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it chases at your heels. And, people that live in a lot of chaos and feel like their life is wrapped up in a lot of chaos probably have a lot of unprocessed trauma.
Hmm. And they're not dealing with it because they just keep going and going and going.
Yeah. Because it's, getting away from the, I saw something beautiful today. If we watch a scene on TV that we don't like and that it upsets us, we don't sit there and rewind it and play it 200 times. But we do our own trauma and the hard things that happen to us. The only power and control we actually have is choosing where we place our focus. And it's not a matter of beating ourselves up when we realize that we've been replaying this scene 1,000 times. It's just the actual awareness. I'm replaying this scene and I'm torturing myself. Maybe it's time to stop. And how can we do it with a little bit of humor? Because I think humor is an important tool, because we've used the sledgehammer long enough, and we've got to put the sledgehammer away. Beating ourselves into submission, beating our ego out of us is never, ever going to work. We're just going to end up horrible, hateful, resentful people. So I think humor and a little bit of levity works better, where we can laugh at ourselves and maybe not find humor in the trauma, but we can find humor in our effort to overcome it. But that, for myself, I didn't get a chance to play. I wasn't a child. So a lot of trauma survivors have to actually learn how to play and how to have fun.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that?
I literally have to force myself sometimes. You're like, hey, I'm too serious here. I'm a nature girl. Get me outside and I'm going to have a better viewpoint. Get me next to a stream and it's even going to be better. Put me in the water and everything becomes good. And we all have to find whatever our own medicine is on that, because I think it is a little bit different for everybody.
Yeah.
But, we don't know what our happy place is. So to me, it's a very good endeavor to start seeking our happy. We were given plenty of horrible things. What's the only way to balance it? Is to bring in the beauty and to bring in things that we enjoy and things that comfort us. My mother had a real hard time that I was still carrying a baby blanket at 10 years old. But my parents got divorced when I was 8 and 9. It was really not a good time for me to have to, she was more worried about saving face than me having the comfort that I needed to overcome something. If you have a baby blanket that helps you to feel better, then please use your baby blanket and don't feel like you have to be an adult and put it away. I know a lot of adults that are going around right now buying weighted blankets because we've learned that, that's okay. Maybe we're not going to get the nurturing that we seek outside of ourselves. So we're going to start nurturing ourselves. And I think that's a really good point for any trauma survivor, is we really do need to create our own brave, safest that we can buffer zone. So allow the nervous system to finally let go and surrender and relax. We get trauma survivors get stuck in that fight or flight and have adrenaline going all the time. And then when they're not in adrenaline, they think there's something wrong because it doesn't feel right.
That's why they can't sit still. They're always having to do something.
The leg is jumping,
Yeah.
If they sit still, they might have to feel their feelings.
Yeah. I know a lot of people like that.
And more than likely, they got a monster living between their ears. The abusive force on the outside became their inner voice. And I want to, that's something I really do think astrologically right now, we have a chance to put a lot of this energetically to rest. In 2018, during an eclipse season, it was, I think, May when I first started getting the messaging. It was about that we were going to move into a whole new era. The way it described it to me was from BC to AD, but our own little, we're going to have to come up with our own letters. Because it's completely different than the one that happened 2000 and something years ago, 2200, I don't remember how many years, where we're 2024 right now. So we have a whole new one, and it's the eclipse seasons in that time started to like unmoor some of the restraints that we all had around ourselves. And it was almost like the last 4 or 5 years was a snow globe. So all of the unconscious stuff that was on sediment that was on the bottom of our snow globes got shook. And we saw it with the pandemic. We saw it with even the writer's strike. There's a lot of different things happening out and that is that snow globe getting shook up, and all that unconscious settlement is coming back up. And we have a huge eclipse that's going to come right before we air this, but between the time that we film it to when we air it. And I actually think that full eclipse is kind of the end of this period that we've had. The more that we removed, the more of a new life is about to come in. So a lot of the trauma that was caused by patriarchal misogyny, it's a very specific flavor, has been coming to the forefront for a lot of people. I'm not the only one that's been healing my own. I've talked to a lot of people that have deep dove into their own traumas, their own codependencies, and are really, really working on this stuff. So a lot of us are in our little honeycombs and taking a whole new look at trauma and emotions. And instead of trying to find perfection, we're actually finding authenticity. A lot of the problem with trauma victims is they are told they have to be perfect. So then they just cover everything up, more or less, put a big old coat of makeup and shield themselves from their own trauma. And things have come up these last 4 or 5 years that aren't let people do that anymore. Either you get stuck in your house completely isolated, good luck running from yourself at that point. What some of the things I used to do, I would call my friends and talk on the phone just so I didn't have to listen to my own brain back in those days. But I really do think that a lot of us are clearing a lot. And the thing is, it's because there's a huge forerunning group that are actually dealing with trauma rather than sweeping it under the rug. It uploads all that information into the Akashic records, and it becomes available to everybody. We are telepathic. We are connected through energy, if we know it or not, if we're aware of it or not. And the more people that are breaking through their own boundaries and their own stuck places are going to be showing the doors to everybody as they find them. So we're not just doing it for ourselves right now. We're doing it for a whole gob of people. And I don't care who you are. If you're doing work on yourself, you're doing it. That is the mission right now.
Yeah, and I find that when you were talking earlier about finding your happy place, I think that is such a good piece of advice, because when you find your happy place, that's when you feel really connected to nature, to spirit, right?
And you can put an anchor
there,
there. You can set your anchor in that place
yeah,
consciously.
right. And then from there, it's like all this creativity comes through, right?
But a lot of times people have to forgive themselves enough to even believe that they deserve a brave, creative space. I work at not just creating my own space now, but also creating space for more of a community, because we need more places where we can just go be ourselves and without any perfection required. Where, hey, if you're having a bad day, it's okay. You just get a hug. No one's gonna ostracize you or push you out. In fact, everyone's just going to embrace you and bring you in more. The more that that happens, a lot of the ways that we deal with trauma is going to change. And we're going to actually be able to, right now, a lot of it's because of the codependency, and we've ended up independent. I can do it myself and push everyone away. I'm really good at that one. If I'm upset and if I'm in my trauma, I push everybody away. But what we really actually need is a lot more embracing. And, I have a yoga group, and one of the main things is you are welcome no matter how you come. Every part of us is welcome. And the more that we create spaces for ourselves like that first, and then also as communities start doing it together, it's going to change the face of this planet.
I hope so, because I feel like that's what we need is community, people looking out for each other, neighbors
It's like
looking out
cold
for
and
each
hot.
other.
There is no such thing as cold. It's just an absence of heat. It's just an absence of love. So when we start bringing the light and we start bringing the love, and the first time someone's afraid they're going to be rejected because they're having a bad day, and they're not rejected, that they're still welcomed and they're still celebrated, there's some magic in that. So I think some of it is up to us to create those healing environments, starting with ourselves.
Yeah, because I think you said it many times before that we are each individuals, and you can't have somebody try to complete you or to fill that void, and because it never will.
My least favorite saying on the planet is, oh, I need my significant other. He's going to complete me, or she's going to complete me. You had better be 100% whole unto yourself before you even come into relationship. Otherwise, you're already abusive. And I know that's a harsh way to put it, but if you come in and expecting somebody else to complete you, that's already an abusive situation. Period.
How's that abusive?
Because you can't complete me. I can't complete you. I can't complete Mike. He cannot complete me.
But is that the conditioning that we're taught? Someone
100% is
can.
the conditioning. And it's part of what keeps us stuck in that unhealthy loop. It's part of the chains that bind us, that keep us from our truth. It's also, if you look into patriarchy, it's, oh, a woman has to have a man. Well, maybe it's the men that actually need the women. I think it goes both ways. And I know men that are perfectly capable of cleaning their own house and cooking. So I'm not, but my husband would be lost. But my dad was a beautiful homemaker. And as soon as, after the divorce, first thing he did was teach himself how to cook, because he knew it was important to cook for kids. So I also believe that we can change, and we don't have to do things the way that they've been done before. And as circumstances change, the more that we're willing to adjust and change, the better things can be. And I think it's important for men and women. I think everybody on the planet needs to know how to create food, because everybody on the planet has to eat. I think everyone on the planet needs to know how to wash a dish, because everyone on the planet's going to dirty a dish.
I second that.
And the thing is I don't mind women's work. It's not to me about, about men's work and women's work and things like that. I actually love the feminine arts. I know how to sew. I know how to crochet. I know how to can food. I'm a great cook. I love to create a home and a comfortable place to live and to be. It's not about necessarily changing the roles. At least add value. Make those, they are value. Show the value that's already there. It's more about the discounting and the scapegoating and a lot of other things to belittle and bring down one half of humanity that I have issues with. And yeah, I do. I have I have some attitude about that.
Really?
I'm not a fan of misogyny at all. I think it's one of the stupidest thing ever created on this planet.
I think that's why we both love Barbie so much, the film.
I adored the movie. I thought it was life changing, and Mike has got to watch it several times too. And he sees it. You know, he saw that Ken was hurt just as bad as Barbie, and he really was able to connect with what Ken was going through. So I think it was helpful on both ends.
Kindred spirits to know what it's like to be the lesser of the two sexes, right?
Yeah. And you know, a lot of people think misogyny is or not misogyny, I'm sorry, matriarchal is the opposite of patriarchal, and that's actually not true. They're completely structured 100% different. And really, it can go down to the basic of everyone in the patriarchy is fighting over the last piece of pie. In the matriarchy, they're all going in and baking new pies. It's really that different of a perspective. And when everyone knows how to make pie, then we're not running out of pies. There's no reason to fight.
Right. Yeah, and this concept of gender roles and how men have to be, the breadwinner and women are the homemakers, and there's nothing wrong with being both, you know.
It's implying that my structure has to be your structure. That's the problem I have with that. I think everybody needs to be able to make their own way because we all have different talents and abilities. I know some very masculine women and I know some very feminine men. I don't think, and there's still men, and there's still women. It's not like that. But gender's a spectrum. And why do I want anyone else to be just like me anyway? So why would I want anyone else to conform? Personally, I'm not into conforming. The patriarchy tries to force every single buddy on this planet to conform. What about somebody else shining their light makes somebody else insecure? And that's really what's going on. And rather than dealing with their own insecurity, they're pointing the finger and projecting.
Yeah, that's what I don't get either. It's kind of like how, far right religious viewpoint is that, you got to have a mom and a dad in a family, and a child needs a mom and a dad. You can't have two dads.
I had a
or two
mom and a
moms.
dad, and the mom was out of her mind and needed some really big help. And so it ended up the man is the one that raised me. I don't think, again, they're requiring everyone to be perfect. It's the perfectionism. And that's what makes me angry, because that's what manipulates and hurts people the most. I know that's what hurt me the most, because I did not fit into their conformed picture. I do not can fit into their conformed picture. Why do people have to even care what another people is doing in their own home behind closed doors?
My sentiments exactly.
The person that wants to do that's the one with the problem.
Exactly.
And that's what indoctrination and conditioning does. Everybody has to look like this. And if they don't, There's something wrong with you. You need to
Yeah.
fix yourself. If you find a man, you'll be all right. Find yourself a good doctor, good priest.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing about, like with marriage equality too. I mean, why do people care if two people of the same gender get married?
How
How
does
does
that
that
affect them?
jeopardize your marriage? How does that even affect your marriage? And if it does affect your marriage, there's something wrong with your marriage.
There's something, and that's just it. I think it actually comes from some pretty severe low self-esteem and self-worth issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And rather than dealing with their own shadow, they're projecting it onto other people. It's another way that people avoid doing their own work because it's hard. And I understand it's hard and it's not necessarily fun to do your work. But the thing is, when you do it, then you actually get to have fun and it's actually fun.
And liberating.
It's so liberating. And I think that's what, if we could somehow or another show that even more and more of how liberating it is to not have to live in perfection, to not have to keep up with the Joneses, to be able to actually pave our own way and our own road and find what makes us happy and what brings fulfillment. I really learned whenever I had migraines, diet, that one person, I do think that the whole blood type actually has something to do. Some people are better with meat and some people are better as vegetarians. And some people can't process any animals and any animal content, and some people just can't do it because of ethics, and that's okay too. If your heart can't eat that, then it's not right for you. And but I'm kind of more paleo and my body runs better that way. But I really learned I had to do elimination diets and then provocation to see what I was having problems with and what was causing the migraines. And I think we kind of have to have that kind of a perspective for our life and start realizing that some of the things that we're doing is just because we were conditioned to do it, not because we like to do it. Or anyway, but start doing some elimination and provocation on our lifestyle as well, not just for the food, or like I did with my environment to find out that I'm reactive to petroleum based products. But we can actually do that in our life of, hey, I'm going to go and experience this and I'm going to really pay attention and be witness to myself. Does this feel good? Does this not feel good? Do I feel uncomfortable and have anxiety? Or does this feel just freeing and liberating to my being? And start doing that with our life. Um, how many times have we thought we had to do something out of responsibility, but it brought us horrible anxiety attacks? And we find out in the long run that it was someone just trying to push us into doing something for them that they didn't want to do, for instance. I love how it gives me whenever I get it out the right way, I get. But that's and I'm back on the eclipses because it is on my mind. I really do think that some of what is happening energetically to the planet, we have moved. Pluto is going into Aquarius, so that age of Aquarius is. We've sang about it since the '60s. It's actually happening now as we speak, and we're gonna. In this last era, it was about industry and production and things like this, but we are going into an age now of empathy and compassion and community. So I think there's a lot of people that have actually been doing the work. They're not the one, it's not the patriarchy falling. You're not hearing about them because they've been so diligent little bees in their own little honeycomb doing their work, so you don't really know what's going on out there. And we can definitely see that everything that's falling, and Rome is falling as we speak. We can watch it happening. But there's a whole new network being built at the same exact time, and some of us can see it because we're directly involved with the creating of it, so we can upload to it and then other people can download from it. It's almost like the cloud. But as we learn and liberate ourselves, we are absolutely uploading all that information into the Akashic. And so it becomes available for everybody. And the more people that do it, it creates an energy of its own to where it just starts spreading.
But it has to be when people are ready for the download, right?
Yeah.
Or to upload.
Well, no matter what, this isn't going to change free will.
Yeah.
Free will is going to be fully still intact. It's up to each one of us if we want to upgrade or not. But the upgrade is going to be available. It's just like, Windows 10 came out. Well, you might want to let somebody else use it for 6 months and get all the bugs out of it. That's okay. I don't think there's any problem with that. I almost think it's going to split into different dimensions where some people will stay in one realm and others will move on into another. One heavier and denser, because it's all frequency. And the heavier floats to the bottom. And the lighter comes to the top.
So what kind of society would that look like?
Well, there would be one that would probably stay a lot like it is today, where everybody's shitting on everybody, and then there'll probably be one where people actually care for one another and create that brave space for everybody to grow and allow people their creativity, and that we're not just here to work for some other man.
And that's in another dimension.
The one that we're creating.
I
think it's actually in creation. The more I've played in these realms, it doesn't exist yet. That's what we're working on. And it's, I got goosed. The only way we can create heaven on earth is by being fully on earth and opening to heaven. So it's about bringing that frequency here, and it will change the dynamic. It's not about ascending to, it's about grounding here and bringing it. But we have to be fully, accept that we are physical beings on a physical planet, and that's how we can bring heaven to earth. But we are vessels and we're channels. And the more that we clean out that vessel and we don't have all kinds of things blocking it to keep it from filling up, that it can fill up with that high frequency. We are the containers that bring the high frequency, that bring that heaven, that brings that higher dimension in. We're not going to it. It's coming to us. And that is why we're having to really work on the dynamic with the male, female, and the patriarchy, because everything feminine has been ostracized and made evil. And how dare you be a receptive being? You better go work, 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 and produce. But some of us actually need to be here and just actually be energetic anchors to help bring this new frequency to the planet.
And that's from working on ourselves.
I ended up on my knees. Is there any more than this? And I was thinking of the mundane, trauma-filled. It had only been hell up to that point for me. And I ended up on my knees. God, is there more? Goddess, is there more? I do switch that more now. And I've always kind of talked about the divine. You know me. I always say they, because it's almost like a chorus to me. It's not this one, but it is one. So, because it's all one. But it can actually come through as a chorus. So I always use they. And I think they is the best for God, because it's not a he or a she. It makes me mad that everyone says God. What if it's goddess? How do they know? That's just it. It's the infinite unknowable being. So any words we put on it aren't going to be it anyway. So why can't we be creative? Why? I don't think that being has any problem or cares what we call it on any level. But I do think it does care that we call it, because I actually believe that divine being has more love for us. There's so much love available to us that we do not realize. And I know this because I thought I was a crappy, shameful, horrible human being. and I was unworthy of love. And when I opened up to that divine frequency and it filled me and I knew I was loved and I was loved deeply, it actually hurt at first. It was the love was actually painful at first because I didn't know what it felt like to be loved.
So it's like so intense that you kind of move to tears, right?
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I knew that I had not done anything that had ever stopped that love, that flow of love to me. It was only my own guilt and shame that put up something in between us. And that was conditioned. I was told I wasn't worthy of that. It wasn't true. I think that that's what this big change that we've got coming in with the, we have an eclipse, a comet, I think we have 9 planets aligning at the same time. I mean, we're talking major astrological stuff shift this week. And I think it's actually to help move some of that old shame and guilt and codependency barriers that other people conditioned into us so we couldn't reach our divine source. But the thing is, that divine source has not quit reaching for us. And some of us have heard the call. I think a lot of us have, actually. I do not at all think that I am the only one at all. I hope to God not, because we need everybody on board. That's right. Whenever I teach people how to read tarot and to do some of the spiritual work that I do not feel at all that they're in competition with me or, somebody else that does what I do. I feel like we need as many people on board as possible right now. There is no competition in that for me. I'm all for empowering everybody and giving the tools to everybody that I possibly can.
Yeah, and I think that when people are ready, it's there for them. Kind of like back in the days when, do you remember when that book Conversations with God first came out?
Oh yeah, Neil Donald
Yeah,
Walsh.
yeah, Walsh. And I
Yep.
remember trying to read it, and I just could not read it for some reason. I just couldn't. I open it up and I start reading, and it just wouldn't go anywhere. And then it was like maybe years later, finally I could open it up, and I was able to absorb everything. And then I went through the trilogy, book one, two, three.
Yep. I
And it's
read them
like
all
that,
in the 90s, I think. Yeah.
yeah. So it's kind of like that feeling right now where people are ready and they have what they're seeking and they're finding it.
For me, it was the Celestine Prophecy. Kind of did the same. That book did the, and when, I was hairdressing at the time and I was reading hundreds of spiritual books a year at that time. I haven't read a book in years now. But someone had recommended it to me, and at first I was all, "Oh, that's like mainstream. I get into real stuff." I was such an ego, and like several different people did it. And then my ex-husband, we were still married at the time, calls me. You wouldn't believe the book that Dave just got in the mail, and I said, "Oh, if it's Celestine Prophecy, I need to read it. I'm gonna quit fighting." And it was. That's exactly the book the guy had gotten in the mail. And I read it, and then I think it was 10 years later, I was leaving Melbourne, Australia, and a book jumped off the shelf at me at the bookstore in the airport. And I grabbed it, and I thought it was one, like a later in the series of Celestine Prophecy, because I knew it was the same author. I did not at all think it was Celestine Prophecy. I get into my seat on the airplane and realize it's the same book. I'd bought the exact same book again. But when I read it, it was a completely different book than the book I'd read 10 years before. And that's just it with spiritual writings. You should be able to go back in a few years and read it, and you have a different perspective, and a whole new understanding comes in. I do that with the Joseph Benner books. He's kind of the one that started the I Am work back in the 1930s. So Imperfect Life, Wealth, they're all available on PDF right now because they're so old. But I can read those every 2 or 3 years and get something completely different out of them. And they're short, quick reads. So I do think it's something like that. And I think some people, they don't know what they're seeking at first, too. I think that's another thing. But whenever we do get in touch with our own black hole and realize that there's nobody else that can complete us first, it's our black hole. It's not, they have to complete their black hole. I have to complete my black hole. And it's not even that you have to fix the black hole, you just have to see that it's there, and then you're whole. Most people only see their good side, so they're only half. If you want to be a whole being, see your other side. And you don't need anybody to complete you at that point. Then you can come together and share the good stuff instead of trying to suck the stuff out of each other. I'm on a mission about codependency.
Yes, you are.
Well, I know how much I hurt myself with it before I realized. Seeking something that there is nobody on this planet was ever, 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 ever going to have. That's, unrequited love is painful. Looking for love in all the wrong places. And how many people are actually just trying to fill that hole with another person rather than finding out what actually feels good to them? It's more, hey, come here so I don't have to focus on my hole.
But I find that a lot of us who suffer from that, it all stems from our childhood.
It's the love wound, the love that we do. I think the ego is 100% our inner child that didn't get the love that it wanted. And most people get out a sledgehammer to fix that poor ego, and all it's going to do is hurt it more. I see the ego as my 3-year-old who did not get the love it needed.
So now you just got to love the heck out of yourself.
And it's the hardest task there is. It's easy to love somebody else. But the more that I have pulled out my own self-hatred and shame and guilt and this and that, I'm a lot more patient with Mike and other people now too than what I was before I pulled that out. Well, the more that I saw that a lot of my own chaos, trauma was conditioned, the more I was able to see that other people's were too. I am able to see now if Mike falls into a state of misogyny, that he literally just watched too many sitcoms when he was little, and it literally drove it into his head. I see it like that now rather than, oh, he's out to get me, or he's my enemy, or, I don't view it like that anymore. I view it as, oh, he got the other half of the conditioning that I had. But before I dealt with my own trauma, I didn't see him like that. I saw him as my perpetrator and me as the victim.
So is
We
that
were
why
stuck
people
in that
get
cycle.
is that why people get defensive and then they start projecting, blaming?
Mike he's been doing a lot of work now, but he had a very low self-esteem, and he learned real easy. It was easier to put other people down than to deal with himself. Comparison sometimes is an easy fix, but it almost always stems from our own lack of self-worth and our own lack of self-esteem. It helped. My father came and ate dinner with all of us, and he saw how critical Mike's father was to him. And I saw my dad duck and do this a few times, and then when we left, he's like, oh my gosh, that was horrible. And a lot of times it's in families, and it's just has been going on for so long. If there's no one else, it's so normal. You don't think that there's anything wrong with it. Mike was told that he wasn't very smart, so he better learn how to chase the soccer ball, for instance. Not necessarily by his family, but just, by life. And whatnot. And so, because he did have problems with his emotions and he didn't know how to deal with his emotions, rather than teaching him how to deal with his emotions, they sent him out onto the soccer field. And he's a very aggressive, mean soccer player. He's good. He's really good at it. But all of that comes out. But he had no idea how to deal with his emotion other than to chase the ball. So what I can do is create a safe space where he can go ahead and say it out loud. It doesn't have to be perfect. And give him a space to unpack that without judgment, without.
So how can you be better at it for someone, to listen and to not judge, even though you haven't experienced it yourself? I think like intellectually you can understand that they've gone through the trauma. You haven't gone through it yourself, so it's hard for you to, I guess, relate emotionally. So then how do you?
I think number one, to not try to fix that person and to not see him as broken.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not an easy task. But I think that's number one thing for somebody, if you want to create space for someone that you love so they can unpack their trauma, you can't judge them. You can't force them. I remember when we were doing the universal energy healing, and they were really good at fixing everybody. Oh, I know how to fix you, and I know how to fix you, and I know, and that is intrusive. It's kind of a predator, in all honesty. We have to take a step back and say, it is not my job to fix this person. First off, there's nothing wrong with them. They went through trauma. There's nothing wrong with them. Don't try to fix them, and just allow them to be witness for that person. Be witness to their healing rather than to their abuse. I know the people that have created that space for me helped more than anything else. The people who tried to fix me, it was literally painful, and we usually ended up in some kind of a fight. It felt like a predator again. It felt like the initial trauma when someone tried to fix me. Because honestly, it's intrusive. Coming from a victim's perspective, it's intrusive. And it's judgmental. And that's not seeing somebody in what they went through. And I've done it to people I'm not saying I'm innocent. I've done it, and I saw the pain on the person's face, and I didn't want to do that to them again. I think that the need for perfectionism is the number one problem in our society. And I think couples try to push perfectionism on each person, rather than, the more that we allow for our humanity, the more harmonious the relationship's going to be, the more supportive the relationship is going to be. I think a lot of the problems, whenever there's a lot of angst and chaos, everyone's trying to make everyone perfect. Rather than, hey, I have a bad day today. I'm going to do my best to not splatter it on you. And just having a different way of dealing with it. But I really do think that we have to give ourselves and others room for all of our emotions, not just the good ones. Because that's the reason why people feel like they're half, is because their whole being isn't accepted. The more that we accept everybody where they are in that moment, the easier it is for us as individuals to move on to the next moment rather than getting stuck. It's like the more someone tries to force you to be perfect and to fix and be fixed, you can actually get stuck in that trauma. The more that people, oh, okay, you're having a bad day, let's go eat ice cream. And just look at it differently.
Yeah, that's good advice.
I think we all need to make some space for the messiness and some allowance that we are a part of nature, and nature by design can be messy. And I think one of the biggest problems in humanity is people trying to be perfect, because that's where we end up suppressing and hiding and swallowing our trauma, and then it lives underneath our cells and we never get rid of it. And right now, in this astrological, we have got a chance. We can truly make a decision right now of what we want to carry into this new era and what we wish to leave behind. And the more that we can be in discernment right now with our own beings, with the way that we think, with the way that we talk to ourselves, with the way that it's a lot about how we engage with ourselves first. And if we deal with that, then it kind of naturally gets better outwardly with other people. But when you stop the inner dialogue of just getting this sledgehammer out and beating the crap out of yourself every day, and really start allowing ourselves to be however we might be in that moment, it's way quicker to move on into a happier, it's easier to find that higher frequency. If someone tries to force you out of a low frequency, everyone's going to be in it together. I'm just going to pull you right in here with me. And I have done it, And I don't like to be fixed. It pisses me off.
I don't think anybody likes to be fixed.
I think all of us would like the allowance to be human and to realize that our mistakes lead us to our successes. That we're not automatically good at something the second we pick it up. That sometimes it takes a minute to develop, and we might have a natural talent, but you still got to hone it. But we have to allow ourselves non-perfection in order to actually be human. Otherwise, I don't know what people, they think that they're better than the divine, that they know better than what that divine frequency knows, which is, to me, is just crazy, because there's no skin and head and eyes are only on the front. The divine being, I think, has 360 perspective. We don't have that. So the more that we can sit down in ourselves and trust that energy and trust that love, that it does love us and it's got our best interest at heart, so it's going to lead us to our best life. And right now, but there's been a lot of gaslighting that we can't even trust our own intuition. You better go to a priest or to a psychiatrist. Claircognizance is the hardest natural intuitive talent there is, because we've all been taught to beat ourselves up so bad. So as soon as we have a claircognizant thought, a clear knowing come to us, the first thing we do is turn around in dichotomy and say, how can you know? Because you're a divine being of light and you're connected to a divine being of light. And you can have inspirational thoughts. Lumen Dang told a story many, many years ago about using guidance, that it's so important to realize that we can't know everything. So we open up to higher knowledge. He was sitting at someone's kitchen table eating cookies, and the refrigerator repairman was there, and he wasn't having any luck fixing the refrigerator. And out of the blue, Lumen Dang looked at him and said, take such and such part and turn it upside down and put it back in there. The guy did it, and boom, the refrigerator worked. Well, come to find out, at the factory, they had put a part in upside down. So whatever this was, it had to go in upside down or else it wasn't going to work. And that's just it. When we come out of our egos and we connect into that divine frequency, we can know things that we can't know.
Because he's not a refrigerator repairman.
Mike has gotten to where if we have any problems with any vehicle, he comes and asks me first, because I can connect to that. I can diagnose vehicles like nobody's business. I've got I can do it with humans too. I don't really like to talk about the medical mediumship right now too much, because I don't necessarily fully agree with some others that are out there. But when we get quiet, we will be directed to what it actually is. The main problem people are having, though, is the itty bitty shitty won't be quiet long enough for them to get intuition. And sometimes you have to trick yourself. I mean, I listen to binaural beats, And that will help me get out of a brain loop. Or, you know, by changing our focus, you can actually come out of a brain loop, but you have to initiate it and work at it. It doesn't just happen by itself.
Where there's that National Geographic article I sent you that says that scientists have now discovered um, that humans have more superpowers than they thought, or that they knew they were capable of.
Sent me a screenshot and I couldn't go
Yeah,
into it. I want to go check it
yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I couldn't get into the article either. I just saw the title, and I thought, oh, yeah.
I know I'm telepathic because I'll get thoughts that there is no way it's about stuff I don't know. There's no way it's my thought. And I'm nobody. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. That's the way I look at it.
Well, I think we're all capable of doing it. We just don't know how.
Exactly. Well, but like myself, it just happened nonstop to where it was almost a curse. I had to really learn to, well, no matter what though, it's hard for me to meditate when other people around are awake. It's easier for me when they're asleep.
Because then you start picking up their stuff.
Yep.
Makes sense.
We do have a chance to do things completely different if we make the choice to do them different. I do think that's astrologically what is happening right now. We have a chance to do things differently. An opening. So lead with empathy, lead with compassion.
Okay.
Don't try to fix anybody because that's intrusive.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, when we're broken, what's wrong with just allowing someone to be broken in that moment? I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, it's not. But it all comes down to that conditioning and the perfection and that need to fix someone because they're not,
Perfect.
how you want them to be.
Just think that about love that can grow if you're not trying to force that on somebody else. To me, if we force, it's getting the cat, trying to stuff the cat in the brown paper sack. What's going to happen? You're going to get sliced to ribbons. Nobody wants to be forced into somebody else's bag. And I think that's important. I just hit another important part because it's consent. Almost every person that went through trauma endured was a loss of consent. So when someone tries to fix somebody else, it's kind of still against that person's consent, the forcing of it. And, when Mike broke my back, he thought he knew how he was going to fix me. He put his feet on my hips and he grabbed my shoulders and he yanked without any warning. So I did not give consent and it broke my vertebrae. I think that that's a really good example of what we're doing to people when we try to fix them. It's not like you have a bad intention, but you're steamrolling that person. And I know for myself when I am going, especially if I have a trauma triggered, PTSD, and I have CPTSD, so it's the nice intense one, is to just let me go through it. It ends way quicker than if I try to stop it, I can get stuck in it forever. But if I just let it go through its course, it's gone.
But how do you know when someone is going through that to allow them to go through that rather than trying to stop it and fix them?
Don't force anybody. Don't fix anybody, ever. Give them space to be however they are in that moment. The more we accept them for how they are in that moment, emotions are mutable. They are not going to stay the same. And the more that we allow an emotion, the more it's going to move on to the next emotion. When we get stuck in emotion is when we try to stop an emotion or fix an emotion. It's like that's where it gets stuck. And that's where a lot of trauma patients get stuck. But whenever we are allowed to feel our feels, there's an actual, you're processing it. When you're feeling it, you're actually finally processing it. We can't process it by shoving it and pretending that we're perfect so that way other people don't judge us or try to fix us. I think we need to really, 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 really remember that there's only one person we can fix, that there's only one person we have control over. And I think even that is elusive as all get out. It's like a slippery fish. But we have a better chance of fixing ourselves than we do somebody else. But I still think we can do to ourselves the same dang thing. If we try to physically, forcefully fix ourselves, and also if you notice, that's a very patriarchal way of doing things. The matriarch's going to fix you a nice cup of tea and say, honey, have a seat. Tell me about it. What's going on?
All right. Everybody got that message?
Give everyone space to breathe and to be, and allow emotions. Stuck emotions are emotions that weren't allowed.
Yes, ma'am. A lot to absorb there.
Kim's going to be chewing on this one for a few days, I can already tell.
I think so.
Even though it's something I understood, I got another level of understanding, like went deeper when I was talking about it. I could feel it. And I understood why I react all of a sudden to someone trying to fix me.
Yeah, I could sense that too. And that was like the explanation I needed to hear too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's how we grow compassion.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another podcast, and hopefully you found that helpful and enlightening. I certainly did.
And if you have any questions or comments, you can find me at cindakay.com. I'm on all the social medias. Join the conversation.
All right. See you in the next podcast.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.